Video, we're going to add some decoration to our clock by making some extrusions. Later on, we'll do some more showing how to do cutouts so we can do negative space. But let's add some decoration. The first thing I want to do is make my clock face a little more interesting, because right now, let's admit it, it's pretty boring. So I'm going to create a sketch on top of this sketch profile, or this face rather. I'll just right click and say create sketch. So now I have a sketch that's going to be exactly sort of tied into my clock face, that round shape. And at this point, I can now start to add some sketch geometry. So I'm going to add a little a construction line, and I'm going to start that from the origin point. I'm going to go all the way up to the very top, and I'll keep that at a 90-degree angle and bring it out to the very edge of my clock. And now I can select that sketch entity and hit construction. Again, that's X on the keyboard, where you can just use the sketch palette if you want to. Now I'm going to add a center rectangle, and I'm going to sort of snap that into the line that I've just created. And I'm just going to create a little rectangle there. I want that bar to be about, let's say I'll make it, how many millimeters? Let's go 16 millimeters. And then I'll tab over and I'll make it 5. There we go. So it's 5 wide and it's 16 tall. And I still need to add some constraints in there, because I'm getting some lines there that are not tied down. So if I turn off all of the components, it'll help me to see that. So I've got this line here, and it's blue, and I can move that up and down, I think, or side to side there. It's moving up and down, you see. So by clicking and dragging on the blue entities, it's telling me that I don't know how far I am on the up and down, on the vertical axis. So that's easily remedied. I will hit D for dimension, and then I will click that sketch entity, and then I will I'll scroll all the way down to my origin point, and then I can dial in the number, and I can say I want you to be 130 away from the origin point. Now if I zoom all the way in, everything's black. It's great. So I've got one thing that I can make. I can sketch that all the way around my clock if I want to. Fusion is ideally suited for doing things and repeating things for you. And so one quick way to create new versions or new geometric forms is for me to create a pattern. So I'm going to create a circular pattern, and the pattern I'm going to create, or the thing I'm going to pattern, is this. I'm going to select all 4 of the lines in my little rectangle there, and then it's going to ask me to identify the center point. The center point, of course, is where it's going to rotate around. So I come into the origin point, I'll snap there, and then if I zoom out a bit, you'll see right away it's already creating my geometry. I want more than 3 of these, so I will come over to my dialog here, and I'll increase the quantity to 12. So I'll just keep clicking here, or I could select it and type it in. But I want 12 markers for each of the hours on my clock. And I can just say, OK. So that's pretty easy. And if I ever want to change that, I can select that icon in the middle there. That is the icon for the circular pattern. And I can just double click it, and I can change any time that I want. Now you'll notice that each of these rectangles that it created around the center has a check box. And that checkbox, you can turn that on and off. So if I untick it, it won't create that one. But I want them all. But it's just nice to know that if you ever wanted to go back and suppress any of these, you could. You don't have to have all the members of the pattern. I'll say OK, finish my sketch, and I'm done. And I'm going to name my sketch, and I'm going to call this the hour markers. And at this point, I have a sketch. If I turn on my clock face, that sketch is sitting on top of the clock face, and I bet you know what I'm going to do next. Now I need to extrude those. So I'm going to hit extrude, and now Fusion wants to know, well, what am I going to extrude? And in this case, I'm going to select each of the hour marker drawings, or the sketches, so that I can extrude them all. So just give me a moment. I will select each one of these. And once they're all selected, and be careful, I selected the middle of the clock by mistake there, but you can just unselect that. Over in my Extrude dialog, I now have 12 profiles selected. That's correct. That's the number of hour markers I need. And I want them to come up. I'm going to come up by thickness, because of course I always have to cut out of the thickness of my material. So that's set to thickness. And in this case, I don't want to say join. I want this to be a new component so that I can have that selectable. And now I've made that new component, and boom, if I say OK, it will make it. And boom, we're done. So now I've got my hour markers. I'll give that a name. And I've got my hour markers sketched. That's lovely. So that's how we would do an extrude. I'd like to point out that if you have these hour markers in your clock, and when you're trying to glue them down, it might be a bit tricky. So later on, I'll show you how you can adjust the 2D sketch that we create in Illustrator to be able to do the laser cutter work. And what I recommend doing is where each of these hour markers ends up, it's a good idea to etch a line or just do a slightly engraved line on top of your acrylic so that you'll know where to glue in these things. And this would apply to anything, whether you want to put a number or a little bar or whatever. But at its bare minimum, I can now turn on all of my other components, and I now have, what will be pretty much a functional clock. I've got some hour markers, I've got some retaining rings on the back, I've got the mechanism and its hole poked through. I'm actually kind of done. But there you go. So circular patterns, really, really useful.